Hello, I'm going to read you some of a book that I've written, so let's get started. From the rising of the brightest star to the settling in of the dusk, sultriness reigned. This was the pattern of the summer solstice in the upper mid-plains, extreme conditions and little or no relief in sight, although not everyone was looking for deliverance. The winters were cold and long and the sunny season hot and short, not short enough some days, yet unsustained for the cold, windy, snowy, icy days of winter that were not far behind Wisconsin summers. Trish was just moving into town. She was used to hot, humid days. Florida was her home before she decided to pack up and move to a totally new area and begin a different job. Suddenly, she'd left a career she had been in for many years, and with a leap of faith, chose a new path for herself. She left behind many friends and colleagues, but no special someone, and no one to call her own. Trish had been married before, but she wasn't looking for Mr. Right, not at her age. Actually, she was only 55, but who's counting? And a man wasn't in the cards, not the one she was holding. Trish had a very simple way of living, and she was fine with that. As she entered the edge of town, she saw a few buildings, some made of brick, and a couple with stone fronts. The college she would be working at wasn't in this area, but she didn't think it was too far from here. As she drove into town, she could sense the order of business being small, yet adequate for the population of 20,000 or so residents. She hoped that it wasn't going to be a town with the kind of folks that knew everybody's business. She didn't think that it would be. She had heard good things from the college where she had taken a position as an art professor. She was excited to be starting with something new. First of all, she was going to stop and get some lunch before going on to her new place to live. She pulled into a parking space and glanced around and decided on a little cafe called Mim's. Mim's Cafe looked inviting with its big glass front windows and green plants and lush flowers placed along the entrance. Inside, Trish chose a small, light blonde wood table by the clear glass window where she could watch the various people whom she would be living near go about their day. "Hello there. Here's a menu for you to look at, and I'll be back to get your order in a moment. My name is Sam." "Thank you," said Trish. As she looked over the menu, she realized how hungry she was and decided to have a burger with the works. Trish loved to eat whatever she wanted when she was hungry. No diet food for her. She really didn't have to be concerned about her weight. She could always eat whatever and stayed a nice size. She loved to walk and play tennis, so exercise was good too. Trish was tall and blonde with blue eyes that sparkled when she talked to you. She could have had many men as dates, but that was not something Trish was interested in at this time. At least that's what she had told herself and her friends for the last 10 years. Sam hurried over to the counter and served coffee to two businessmen having a meeting during their lunch, and then over to Trish's table to take her order. "So," said Sam, "what can I get for you today?" Trish looked up briefly to notice Sam's lovely red hair, pulled back to show off beautiful ivory skin and green eyes bright with interest. "I would love to have a burger, American cheese, well done, and fries, please." Sam took the order and Trish sat back to look over the cafe and those eating and talking during the lunchtime. Trish felt good about being here. She was looking forward to getting started with her work. She'd never taught at a college. Years ago, after she had graduated, she taught 5th grade art and then had gotten married. Her husband, that is, her late husband, wanted her to travel with him in his career, so she gave up her teaching job. Trish felt sad for a moment as she thought back to teaching the children, and she knew that her feelings were not only for her students. Her husband had died suddenly in a car accident that had happened when he was on his way to pick her up from school. She brushed a tear from her cheek and pushed the thought of an earlier time in her life to the back of her mind with all the other pasts she thought about now and again. Not today, though. Today was a new beginning, and she was going to enjoy herself. "Are you passing through or staying with us for a while?" asked Sam as she brought the burger and fries to set in front of Trish. "I'm going to be teaching art at the college here this fall," said Trish. "Well, it's very nice to meet you. I work here part-time while I'm finishing my degree where you'll be teaching." Trish smiled and they shook hands. Having a new friend was always a plus when you had just moved 1,400 miles to an unfamiliar town with a new job. Trish was glad she had stopped in Mim's Cafe. Chapter 2. The town of Randall was a beautiful area with tall oak trees and big 2-story houses with porches that called for conversation among friends and family. The old-style streets and the multicolored rose bushes and garden-like lawns were as inviting as a summer picnic held in the park for the celebration of life and living in America. Trish was glad she had chosen this wonderful place to start a new time in her life. Maybe she would not miss her old life as much as she thought. Pulling into the driveway, where she had rented an apartment in a large old Victorian home, she smiled and felt relaxed and excited to see her new living space. Just as she got out of her car and started up the steps to the massive open-aired porch, Sally Martine came out the front door with her hand outstretched, really wanting to make a warm initial welcome to her newest tenant. "Good afternoon. You must be Trish Turner. I'm Sally Martine." "Yes," said Trish. "It's very nice to meet you. I just had lunch at Mim's, and I was excited to see my new living space." "Well, come on in and I'll show you around," said Sally. Sally had owned the mansion, as it was referred to by many in the town, for the last 10 years, and she had always wanted to have her tenants be friends as well as paying residents. She felt good about meeting Trish and was grateful for the opportunity to welcome her to Randall and all the great things in store there for the people. There was a library down the street from the town square, and Sally's mansion was just 5 blocks from the town. The college was 3 miles after the town, so everything was going to be really close where Trish would be living. She thought about being able to walk to different places with ease, and maybe she would buy a bicycle too. The memory of riding in the summer and seeing the beauty of the sky and trees gave her a nice feeling, and she hoped she would find her way around in no time. Her furnishings were simple in the apartment. She would need to add a few items, but all in all, everything was already there she had desired to have for comfort. Her choice to create her own works of art, as she became familiar with the different mediums once more, was on her mind. It had been many years since she had taken out her supplies and painted or sketched anything at all. The last several years she had been involved in her work, and being in sales for a large medical company had left little time for the finer days of creating art for art's sake. Now, though, because she was a professor at the college and art was her forte, she could certainly find time to create, and what was to stop her? Trish drove to the college and went into the administration building and found everything was set up and ready to go. Her class area for teaching and her office where she would do all the paperwork, or actually computer entries these days, were required. It was just a matter of getting familiar with it all. Trish didn't mind the trivial stuff that the staff of a learning institution went through in order to be able to convey some important formal education to anyone willing to pay the price, financially and mentally as well as emotionally. There were many attributes a student needed to possess as they pursued their path of learning. 30 years ago, when she had graduated from college with her MFA and then proceeded on to getting her PhD, the structure was different. She was willing to do whatever it took to make a difference in her students' lives as far as giving them her best teaching self. She loved art, and letting others develop that aspect of their self was why she had chosen to go back to teaching. She believed in education and the process that helped one become a stronger individual from the act of beginning and finishing something beyond one's present state of knowledge. Just down the hall from where her classroom was, she could see that students were standing and talking to a very distinguished-looking man about her own age, maybe a little older, but nonetheless, he had caught her attention. Should she go and introduce herself, or just wait until they crossed each other's path? She would make friends easily. She always had before. As she started back into her own classroom, Professor Johns came quickly to her side and stretched out his hand to welcome her to Winston College. "So," said Professor Johns, "I heard you were starting with us this summer, and I want to extend an invitation to the faculty social supper this evening. You probably already read about it in your welcome package," he stated. Well, Trish looked surprised, but calmly replied that she had not seen the invitation as her package was unopened. "I'm thinking that would be nice. It will give me a chance to meet some of the other staff members, and I thank you for mentioning it to me." Professor John nodded as he touched the face of his watch, indicating an appointment he must get to. Off he went, and Trish went back inside her classroom to familiarize herself with her class lists. Chapter 3. It was a gloomy day with hardly a breeze, only clouds, and a temperature of 90 degrees. Sometimes it seemed as though it was going to rain, but no precipitation so far. Trish got out her newly purchased bike and decided to go for a short ride. If it started showering or even pouring, she wasn't going to be that far away from her house. So what if she got a bit wet, or even soaked for that matter? The important thing was to get going and get outside. She needed to feel the push of those petals beneath her feet. The last couple of days had been long with getting settled in her new town, new living space, and her new job. She was glad she had made a change for herself. This really had been a long time coming, even though she had decided abruptly to do it. After the death of her husband, life had been a blur. She had gotten along okay financially, but she was lonely and in shock of living without her husband. They had met during her last year of her doctorate work and married that same year. At first, she was happy teaching children and art, but then Paul, her husband, wanted her to quit working so that she would be available for traveling with him. It was actually on her last day of her 2-week notice that he had been involved in that terrible car accident, and that was the end of that part of her life. Her teaching children art had been an important choice for Trish, and she really loved her work and the students. The administration already had someone in her place when the accident took Paul's life. She was just finishing up her last day at the school. The memory of all this had enveloped Trish as she was riding her bike, and she realized the sky had darkened quickly, and she started towards her house. Tomorrow was Sunday, and she had located a church that she wanted to attend. It was a big, beautiful stone building on the edge of town. The service started at 11 a.m., and she was excited to be a part of something where she could make friends and learn more about herself and her faith. Trish had a feeling that it was going to be a good fit for her. She arrived home just as the thunder boomed loud and rain emerged from the darkened atmosphere in little drops that all of a sudden wind and more clashing of clouds. She had gotten her bike in the garage she shared with the owner just as heavy rain started pouring and beating against the house. Trish got out some salad and juice for lunch and began thinking of a first project for her students. The phone rang as she was finishing lunch, and she answered hello with her last bite of salad. "Oh, yes, Professor Johns. How may I help you?" she inquired. Professor Johns asked, "I was wondering if you enjoyed yourself at the faculty supper Friday." Trish responded that it was very nice, and yes, she had enjoyed herself. "Why don't you please call me Michael?" he requested. "I didn't get a chance to talk to you last evening, and I thought maybe we could have lunch on Sunday afternoon, unless you have plans." "Oh," said Trish. "That's very kind of you, Michael. I will be going to church, but the afternoon for lunch sounds great." They talked on for another few minutes, and then Trish said yes, she would meet him at Mims at 1:30 for lunch tomorrow afternoon. They said goodbye, and Trish hung up the phone. Trish was glad to have a friendship with someone from Winston College. It had always been important to her to have other people to share ideas with and learn from. Michael seemed like an interesting man, and she looked forward to getting to know him better. The thought of a relationship beyond friendship was not in her mind, not at this time anyway. "I think it's time to get my art supplies out and start a project or a piece of art for my apartment," thought Trish. "It has been a while, and I want to get started now so that I can get into the feel of being creative when I begin teaching on Monday." Trish had not shopped for art materials in a year or two, but she had brought along different art paper and paints that had sat idle for a period of time. She found that she had plenty of paper to choose from, and she chose a piece suitable for watercolor or acrylic with water. Trish loved the fluidity of the paint on paper with water. To her, it seemed to add to creative flow, seeing the movement of the paint. It helped that she had an open mind to what art is and can be. To her, it was an expression from the inside of one's mind, and so there was plenty of opportunity to communicate. So many people thought that art was limited to realistically being able to duplicate something within one's predetermined view of a subject, such as drawing a table and chairs exactly as one saw it, or how a photograph would identify an object. Trish realized there were many different ideas about art, and that was one of the reasons she enjoyed teaching so much. Within the boundaries of formal education, she had a credible venue for telling her version of art. Of course, this wasn't always received with open arms or minds, but Trish knew that being a pioneer was part of being an artist. After choosing her material to paint on, Trish liked to squeeze out a couple of colors and began making her strokes or marks with whatever brush she felt inclined to reach for. To Trish, this beginning was an important part because that is what it was, a beginning. That was one of the most important aspects of being in a creative mode. Just get started. Don't put a lot of thought into the project, especially if you were going to work intuitively, and that is what Trish preferred. The piece would evolve, and that was another exciting part of the communication. As the piece of work continued to become whatever it was meant to be, the solving of problems and decisions played their roles. Yes, these were some aspects of art Trish truly loved. These were the crux of the whole situation for her. These were the times when she was so involved in her work that time passed and all was well within her world. This is the part where tears could come forth, and Trish never knew before that they would fill up her eyes and roll down her cheeks like an overfilled cup of tea. Her tears were purely responsive to her work and her process of creating. After a period of time, Trish looked at what she had painted. As she looked, she saw trees and a road that curved around a couple of times. The colors she had chosen were earth tones and also the blues of a midday sky, and her brushstrokes elicited the feeling of a bit of wind in the trees. No people were in her work, not yet, and not for a very long time. She thought back to when she was a child and did artwork. That was the beginning of her love for color and making pictures. Were there people in her work at that time? Not having people in her work was something she had noticed a while back. She wondered if it was significant. She thought it might be. She was definitely becoming interested in having people in her work, just as she was interested in having people in her life. There had been times when she felt more like a loner, but those times seemed to be in the past. She had many friends in Florida, and she was making friends here in Randall. Being a loner maybe was in response to something in her life. She wasn't sure. She just knew that she enjoyed being around different people, and she liked having people like her. And we will continue with Chapter 4 shortly. Thank you.